Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
Chapter 9. George is introduced to work. Heathenish instincts of tow lines. Ungrateful conduct of a double-sculling skiff. Towers and Toad. A youth discovered for lovers. Strange disappearance of an elderly lady. Much haste. Less speed. Being towed by girls. Exciting sensation. The missing lock or the haunted river. Music. Saved. We made George work. Now we had got him. He did not want to work. Of course, that goes without saying. He had had a hard time in the city. So he explained. Harris, who is callous in his nature, and not prone to pity, said, and now you are going to have a hard time on the river for a change. Change is good for everyone. Out you get. He could not in conscience, not even George's conscience, object. Though he did suggest that, perhaps, it would be better for him to stop in the boat and get tea ready, while Harris and I towed, because getting tea was such a worrying work, and Harris and I looked tired. The only reply we made to this, however, was to pass him over the tow line, and he took it and stepped out. There is something very strange and unaccountable about a tow line. You roll it up with as much patience and care as you would take to fold up a new pair of trousers. And 5 minutes afterwards, when you pick it up, it is one ghastly, so revolting tangle. I do not wish to be insulting, but I firmly believe that if you took an average tow line and stretched it out straight across the middle of a field, and then turned your back on it for 30 seconds, that, when you looked round again, you would find that it had got itself all together in a heap in the middle of the field, and had twisted itself up, and tied itself into knots, and lost its two ends, and become all loops, and it would take you a good half hour, sitting down there on the grass and swearing all the while, to disentangle it again. That is my opinion of tow lines in general. Of course, there may be honorable exceptions. I do not say that there are not. There may be tow lines that are a credit to their profession, conscientious. Respectable tow lines that do not imagine they are crochet work, and try to knit themselves up into antimacassars the instant they are left to themselves. I say there may be such tow lines. I sincerely hope there are. But I have not met with them. This tow line I had taken in myself just before we had got to the lock. I would not let Harris touch it, because he is careless. I had looped it round slowly and cautiously, and tied it up in the middle, and folded it in two, and laid it down gently at the bottom of the boat. Harris had lifted it up scientifically, and had put it into George's hand. George had taken it firmly, and held it away from him, and had begun to unravel it as if he were taking the swaddling clothes off a newborn infant, and, before he had unwound a dozen yards, the thing was more like a badly made doormat than anything else. It is always the same, and the same sort of thing always goes on in connection with it. The man on the bank, who is trying to disentangle it, thinks all the fault lies with the man who rolled it up, and when a man up the river thinks a thing, he says it. What have you been trying to do with it? Make a fishing net of it. You've made a nice mess you have. Why couldn't you wind it up properly? You silly dummy, he grunts from time to time as he struggles wildly with it, and lays it out flat on the tow path, and runs round and round it, trying to find the end. On the other hand, the man who wound it up thinks the whole cause of the muddle rests with the man who is trying to unwind it. It was all right when you took it, he exclaims indignantly. Why don't you think what you are doing? You go about things in such a slapdash style. You'd get a scaffolding pole entangled, you would. And they feel so angry with one another that they would like to hang each other with the thing. 10 minutes go by, and the first man gives a yell and goes mad, and dances on the rope, and tries to pull it straight by seizing hold of the first piece that comes to his hand and hauling at it. Of course, this only gets it into a tighter tangle than ever. Then the second man climbs out of the boat and comes to help him, and they get in each other's way and hinder one another. They both get hold of the same bit of line and pull at it in opposite directions and wonder where it is caught. In the end, they do get it clear and then turn round and find that the boat has drifted off and is making straight for the weir. This really happened once to my own knowledge. It was up by Boveney, one rather windy morning. We were pulling downstream, and as we came round the bend, we noticed a couple of men on the bank. They were looking at each other with as bewildered and helplessly miserable expression as I have ever witnessed on any human countenance before or since. And they held a long tow line between them. It was clear that something had happened, so we eased up and asked them what was the matter. Why, our boat's gone off, they replied in an indignant tone. We just got out to disentangle the tow line, and when we looked round, it was gone, and they seemed hurt at what they evidently regarded as a mean and ungrateful act on the part of the boat. We found the truant for them half a mile further down, held by some rushes, and we brought it back to them. I bet they did not give that boat another chance for a week. I shall never forget the picture of those two men walking up and down the bank with a tow line, looking for their boat. One sees a good many funny incidents up the river in connection with towing. One of the most common is the sight of a couple of towers walking briskly along, deep in an animated discussion, while the man in the boat, 100 yards behind them, is vainly shrieking to them to stop and making frantic signs of distress with a skull. Something has gone wrong, the rudder has come off, or the boat hook has slipped overboard, or his hat has dropped into the water and is floating rapidly downstream. He calls to them to stop, quite gently and politely at first. Hi, stop a minute. Will you? He shouts cheerily. I've dropped my hat overboard. Then, hi Tom, Dick, can't you hear? Not quite so affably this time. Then, hi, confound you. You dunderheaded idiots, hi stop, oh you. After that he springs up and dances about and roars himself red in the face and curses everything he knows. And the small boys on the bank stop and jeer at him and pitch stones at him as he is pulled along past them at the rate of 4 miles an hour and can't get out. Much of this sort of trouble would be saved if those who are towing would keep remembering that they are towing, and give a pretty frequent look round to see how their man is getting on. It is best to let one person tow. When two are doing it, they get chattering and forget, and the boat itself, offering, as it does, but little resistance, is of no real service in reminding them of the fact. As an example of how utterly oblivious a pair of towers can be to their work, George told us, later on in the evening, when we were discussing the subject after supper, of a very curious instance. He and 3 other men, so he said, were sculling a very heavily laden boat up from Maidenhead one evening, and a little above Cookham Lock they noticed a fellow and a girl walking along the towpath, both deep in an apparently interesting and absorbing conversation. They were carrying a boat hook between them, and attached to the boat hook was a tow line, which trailed behind them, its end in the water. No boat was near. No boat was in sight. There must have been a boat attached to that tow line at some time or other. That was certain, but what had become of it? What ghastly fate had overtaken it, and those who had been left in it, was buried in mystery, whatever the accident may have been. However, it had in no way disturbed the young lady and gentleman who were towing. They had the boat hook and they had the line, and that seemed to be all that they thought necessary to their work. George was about to call out and wake them up, but at that moment, a bright idea flashed across him, and he did. He got the hitcher instead, and reached over, and drew in the end of the tow line, and they made a loop in it, and put it over their mast, and then they tidied up the sculls, and went and sat down in the stern, and lit their pipes, and that young man and young woman towed those 4 hulking chaps and a heavy boat up to Marlow. George said he never saw so much thoughtful sadness concentrated into one glance before, as when, at the lock, that young couple grasped the idea that, for the last 2 miles, they had been towing the wrong boat. George fancied that, if it had not been for the restraining influence of the sweet woman at his side, the young man might have given way to violent language. The maiden was the first to recover from her surprise, and when she did, she clasped her hands and said, wildly, "Oh, Henry, then where is Auntie?" "Did they ever recover the old lady?" asked Harris. George replied he did not know. Another example of the dangerous want of sympathy between tower and towed was witnessed by George and myself once up near Walton. It was where the towpath shelves gently down into the water, and we were camping on the opposite bank, noticing things in general. By and by, a small boat came in sight, towed through the water at a tremendous pace by a powerful barge horse, on which sat a very small boy. Scattered about the boat, in dreamy and reposeful attitudes, lay 5 fellows, the man who was steering having a particularly restful appearance. "I should like to see him pull the wrong line," murmured George, as they passed, and at that precise moment the man did it, and the boat rushed up the bank with a noise like the ripping up of 40,000 linen sheets. 2 men, a hamper, and 3 oars immediately left the boat on the larboard side and reclined on the bank. And 1.5 moments afterwards, 2 other men disembarked from the starboard and sat down among boat hooks and sails and carpet bags and bottles. The last man went on 20 yards further and then got out on his head. This seemed to sort of lighten the boat, and it went on much easier. The small boy shouting at the top of his voice and urging his steed into a gallop. The fellows sat up and stared at one another. It was some seconds before they realized what had happened to them. But when they did, they began to shout lustily for the boy to stop. He, however, was too much occupied with the horse to hear them, and we watched them, flying after him, until the distance hid them from view. I cannot say I was sorry at their mishap. Indeed, I only wish that all the young fools who have their boats towed in this fashion, and plenty do, could meet with similar misfortunes. Besides the risk they run themselves, they become a danger and an annoyance to every other boat they pass. Going at the pace they do, it is impossible for them to get out of anybody else's way, or for anybody else to get out of theirs. Their line gets hitched across your mast and overturns you, or it catches somebody in the boat and either throws them into the water or cuts their face open. The best plan is to stand your ground and be prepared to keep them off with the butt end of a mast. Of all experiences in connection with towing, the most exciting is being towed by girls. It is a sensation that nobody ought to miss. It takes 3 girls to tow always, 2 hold the rope, and the other one runs round and round and giggles. They generally begin by getting themselves tied up. They get the line round their legs and have to sit down on the path and undo each other, and then they twist it round their necks and are nearly strangled. They fix it straight, however, at last, and start off at a run, pulling the boat along at quite a dangerous pace. At the end of 100 yards, they are naturally breathless and suddenly stop it, and all sit down on the grass and laugh, and your boat drifts out to midstream and turns round. Before you know what has happened, or can get hold of a scull, then they stand up and are surprised. "Oh, look," they say, "he's gone right out into the middle." They pull on pretty steadily for a bit after this, and then it all at once occurs to one of them that she will pin up her frock, and they ease up for the purpose, and the boat runs aground. You jump up and push it off, and you shout to them not to stop. "Yes, what's the matter?" they shout back. "Don't stop." You roar. "Don't what?" "Don't stop, go on, go on. Go back, Emily, and see what it is they want," says one, and Emily comes back and asks what it is. "What do you want?" she says. "Anything happened?" "No," you reply. "It's all right, only go on. You know, don't stop." "Why not?" "Why? We can't steer. If you keep stopping, you must keep some way on the boat." "Keep some what?" "Some way you must keep the boat moving." "Oh, all right. I'll tell 'em." Are we doing it all right? Oh, yes. Very nicely. Indeed. Only don't stop. It doesn't seem difficult at all. I thought it was so hard. No, no. It's simple enough. You want to keep on steady at it. That's all. I see. Give me out my red shawl. It's under the cushion. You find the shawl and hand it out. And by this time, another one has come back and thinks she will have hers too. And they take Mary's on chance. And Mary does not want it. So they bring it back and have a pocket comb instead. It is about 20 minutes before they get off again. And at the next corner, they see a cow, and you have to leave the boat to chivvy the cow out of their way. There is never a dull moment in the boat while girls are towing it. George got the line right after a while and towed us steadily on to Penton Hook. There we discussed the important question of camping. We had decided to sleep on board that night, and we had either to lay up just about there or go on past Staines. It seemed early to think about shutting up then. However, with the sun still in the heavens, and we settled to push straight on for Runnymede, 3.5 miles further, a quiet wooded part of the river, and where there is good shelter. We all wished, however, afterward that we had stopped at Penton Hook. 3 or 4 miles upstream is a trifle, early in the mornings, but it is a weary pull at the end of a long day. You take no interest in the scenery during these last few miles. You do not chat and laugh. Every half-mile you cover seems like 2. You can hardly believe you are only where you are. And you are convinced that the map must be wrong, and when you have trudged along for what seems to you at least 10 miles, and still the lock is not in sight, you begin to seriously fear that somebody must have sneaked it and run off with it. I remember being terribly upset once up the river, in a figurative sense. I mean, I was out with a young lady, cousin on my mother's side, and we were pulling down to Goring. It was rather late, and we were anxious to get in. At least she was anxious to get in. It was 6:30 when we reached Benson's Lock, and dusk was drawing on, and she began to get excited then. She said she must be in to supper. I said it was a thing I felt I wanted to be in at, too, and I drew out a map I had with me to see exactly how far it was. I saw it was just 1.5 miles to the next lock, Wallingford, and 5 on from there to Cleve. "Oh, it's all right," I said. "We'll be through the next lock before 7. And then there is only one more," and I settled down and pulled steadily away. We passed the bridge, and soon after that I asked if she saw the lock. She said no. She did not see any lock, and I said, "Oh," and pulled on. Another 5 minutes went by, and then I asked her to look again. "No," she said, "I can't see any signs of a lock." "But you are sure you know a lock?" "When you do see one," I asked hesitatingly, not wishing to offend her. The question did offend her, however, and she suggested that I had better look for myself, so I laid down the sculls and took a view. The river stretched out straight before us in the twilight for about 1 mile. Not a ghost of a lock was to be seen. "You don't think we have lost our way, do you?" asked my companion. I did not see how that was possible, though. As I suggested, we might have somehow got into the weir stream and be making for the falls. This idea did not comfort her in the least, and she began to cry. She said we should both be drowned, and that it was a judgment on her for coming out with me. It seemed an excessive punishment. I thought, but my cousin thought not, and hoped it would all soon be over. I tried to reassure her, and to make light of the whole affair. I said that the fact evidently was that I was not rowing as fast as I fancied I was, but that we should soon reach the loch now, and I pulled on for another mile. Then I began to get nervous myself. I looked again at the map. There was Wallingford Loch, clearly marked, 1.5 miles below Benson's. It was a good, reliable map, and, besides, I recollected the loch myself. I had been through it twice. Where were we? What had happened to us? I began to think it must be all a dream, and that I was really asleep in bed, and should wake up in a minute, and be told it was past 10. I asked my cousin if she thought it could be a dream, and she replied that she was just about to ask me the same question, and then we both wondered if we were both asleep. And if so, who was the real one that was dreaming? And who was the one that was only a dream? It got quite interesting. I still went on pulling, however, and still no loch came in sight, and the river grew more and more gloomy and mysterious under the gathering shadows of night, and things seemed to be getting weird and uncanny. I thought of hobgoblins and banshees, and will-o'-the-wisps, and those wicked girls who sit up all night on rocks, and lure people into whirlpools and things, and I wished I had been a better man, and knew more hymns, and in the middle of these reflections I heard the blessed strains of He's Got 'Em On, played badly on a concertina, and knew that we were saved. I do not admire the tones of a concertina as a rule, but oh, how beautiful the music seemed to us both then, far, far more beautiful than the voice of Orpheus or the lute of Apollo, or anything of that sort could have sounded. Heavenly melody, in our then state of mind, would only have still further harrowed us. A soul-moving harmony, correctly performed, we should have taken as a spirit warning, and have given up all hopes. But about the strains of He's Got 'Em On, jerked spasmodically, and with involuntary variations, out of a wheezy accordion, there was something singularly human and reassuring. The sweet sounds drew nearer, and soon the boat from which they were worked lay alongside us. It contained a party of provincial Arise and Ariots, out for a moonlight sail. There was not any moon, but that was not their fault. I never saw more attractive, lovable people in all my life. I hailed them and asked if they could tell me the way to Wallingford Loch, and I explained that I had been looking for it for the last 2 hours. Wallingford Loch, they answered. Law love you, sir, that's been done away with for over a year. There ain't no Wallingford Loch now. Sir, you're close to Cleve now. Blow me tight if ain't a gentleman been looking for Wallingford Loch. Bill, I had never thought of that. I wanted to fall upon all their necks and bless them, but the stream was running too strong just there to allow of this. So I had to content myself with mere cold-sounding words of gratitude. We thanked them over and over again, and we said it was a lovely night, and we wished them a pleasant trip. And I think I invited them all to come and spend a week with me, and my cousin said her mother would be so pleased to see them. And we sang the soldiers' chorus out of Faust, and got home in time for supper. After all, Chapter 10, our first night, under canvas, an appeal for help, contrariness of tea kettles, how to overcome, supper, how to feel virtuous, wanted a comfortably appointed, well-drained desert island, neighborhood of South Pacific Ocean preferred. Funny thing that happened to George's father. A restless night. Harris and I began to think that Belweir Lock must have been done away with after the same manner. George had towed us up to Staines, and we had taken the boat from there, and it seemed that we were dragging 50 tons after us, and were walking 40 miles. It was 7:30 when we were through, and we all got in and sculled up close to the left bank, looking out for a spot to haul up in. We had originally intended to go on to Magna Charta Island, a sweetly pretty part of the river, where it winds through a soft, green valley, and to camp in one of the many picturesque inlets to be found round that tiny shore. But somehow, we did not feel that we yearned for the picturesque nearly so much now as we had earlier in the day. A bit of water between a coal barge and a gasworks would have quite satisfied us for that night. We did not want scenery. We wanted to have our supper and go to bed. However, we did pull up to the picnic point. It is called, and dropped into a very pleasant nook under a great elm tree, to the spreading roots of which we fastened the boat. Then we thought we were going to have supper. We had dispensed with tea, so as to save time. But George said no, that we had better get the canvas up first, before it got quite dark, and while we could see what we were doing. Then, he said, all our work would be done, and we could sit down to eat with an easy mind. That canvas wanted more putting up than I think any of us had bargained for. It looked so simple in the abstract. You took 5 iron arches, like gigantic croquet hoops, and fitted them up over the boat, and then stretched the canvas over them, and fastened it down. It would take quite 10 minutes. We thought that was an underestimate. We took up the hoops and began to drop them into the sockets placed for them. You would not imagine this to be dangerous work, but looking back now, the wonder to me is that any of us are alive to tell the tale. They were not hoops. They were demons. First, they would not fit into their sockets at all, and we had to jump on them and kick them and hammer at them with the boat hook, and when they were in, it turned out that they were the wrong hoops for those particular sockets, and they had to come out again. But they would not come out until 2 of us had gone and struggled with them for 5 minutes, when they would jump up suddenly and try and throw us into the water and drown us. They had hinges in the middle, and when we were not looking, they nipped us with these hinges in delicate parts of the body, and while we were wrestling with one side of the hoop and endeavoring to persuade it to do its duty. The other side would come behind us in a cowardly manner and hit us over the head. We got them fixed at last, and then all that was to be done was to arrange the covering over them. George unrolled it and fastened one end over the nose of the boat. Harris stood in the middle to take it from George and roll it on to me, and I kept by the stern to receive it. It was a long time coming down to me. George did his part all right, but it was new work to Harris, and he bungled it. How he managed it, I do not know. He could not explain himself, but by some mysterious process or other he succeeded. After 10 minutes of superhuman effort, in getting himself completely rolled up in it. He was so firmly wrapped round and tucked in and folded over that he could not get out. He, of course, made frantic struggles for freedom, the birthright of every Englishman. And in doing so, I learned this afterwards. Knocked over George, and then George, swearing at Harris, began to struggle too, and got himself entangled and rolled up. I knew nothing about all this at the time. I did not understand the business at all myself. I had been told to stand where I was, and wait till the canvas came to me. And Montmorency and I stood there and waited, both as good as gold. We could see the canvas being violently jerked and tossed about, pretty considerably, but we supposed this was part of the method, and did not interfere. We also heard much smothered language coming from underneath it, and we guessed that they were finding the job rather troublesome, and concluded that we would wait until things had got a little simpler before we joined in. We waited some time, but matters seemed to get only more and more involved, until, at last, George's head came wriggling out over the side of the boat, and spoke up. It said, "Give us a hand here. Can't you? You cuckoo standing there like a stuffed mummy, when you see we are both being suffocated. You dummy." I never could withstand an appeal for help, so I went and undid them, not before it was time, either, for Harris was nearly black in the face. It took us half an hour's hard labor. After that, before it was properly up, and then we cleared the decks and got out supper. We put the kettle on to boil, up in the nose of the boat, and went down to the stern and pretended to take no notice of it, but set to work to get the other things out. That is the only way to get a kettle to boil up the river. If it sees that you are waiting for it and are anxious, it will never even sing. You have to go away and begin your meals, as if you were not going to have any tea at all. You must not even look round at it. Then you will soon hear it sputtering away, mad to be made into tea. It is a good plan. 2. If you are in a great hurry, to talk very loudly to each other about how you don't need any tea, and are not going to have any. You get near the kettle, so that it can overhear you, and then you shout out, "I don't want any tea, do you?" George, to which George shouts back, "No, no, I don't like tea, we'll have lemonade instead, tea's so indigestible." Upon which the kettle boils over, and puts the stove out. We adopted this harmless bit of trickery, And the result was that, by the time everything else was ready, the tea was waiting. Then we lit the lantern and squatted down to supper. We wanted that supper. For 35 minutes, not a sound was heard throughout the length and breadth of that boat, save the clank of cutlery and crockery, and the steady grinding of 4 sets of molars. At the end of 35 minutes, Harris said, "Ah," and took his left leg out from under him and put his right one there instead. 5 minutes afterwards, George said, "Ah, too," and threw his plate out on the bank, and 3 minutes later than that, Montmorency gave the first sign of contentment he had exhibited since we had started, and rolled over on his side, and spread his legs out, and then I said, "Ah," and bent my head back, and bumped it against one of the hoops. But I did not mind it. I did not even swear. How good one feels when one is full, how satisfied with ourselves and with the world, people who have tried it. Tell me that a clear conscience makes you very happy and contented, but a full stomach does the business quite as well, and is cheaper, and more easily obtained. One feels so forgiving and generous after a substantial and well-digested meal, so noble-minded, so kindly-hearted. It is very strange, this domination of our intellect by our digestive organs. We cannot work, we cannot think, unless our stomach wills so. It dictates to us our emotions, our passions. After eggs and bacon, it says, work after beefsteak and porter. It says, sleep after a cup of tea, 2 spoonsful for each cup, and don't let it stand more than 3 minutes. It says to the brain, now, rise and show your strength. Be eloquent and deep and tender, see, with a clear eye, into nature and into life, spread your white wings of quivering thought, and soar, a godlike spirit, over the whirling world beneath you, up through long lanes of flaming stars to the gates of eternity. After hot muffins, it says, be dull and soulless, like a beast of the field, a brainless animal, with listless eye, unlit by any ray of fancy, or of hope, or fear, or love, or life, and after brandy, taken in sufficient quantity, it says, now, come, fool, grin and tumble, that your fellow men may laugh, drivel in folly, and splutter in senseless sounds, and show what a helpless ninny is poor man whose wit and will are drowned. Like kittens, side by side, in half an inch of alcohol. We are but the veriest, sorriest slaves of our stomach. Reach not after morality and righteousness. My friends, watch vigilantly your stomach, and diet it with care and judgment. Then virtue and contentment will come and reign within your heart, unsought by any effort of your own, and you will be a good citizen, a loving husband, and a tender father, a noble, pious man. Before our supper, Harris and George and I were quarrelsome and snappy and ill-tempered after our supper. We sat and beamed on one another, and we beamed upon the dog. Too, we loved each other. We loved everybody. Harris, in moving about, trod on George's corn. Had this happened before supper, George would have expressed wishes and desires concerning Harris's fate in this world and the next that would have made a thoughtful man shudder. As it was, he said, "Steady, old man, wear wheat." And Harris, instead of merely observing, in his most unpleasant tones, that a fellow could hardly help treading on some bit of George's foot, if he had to move about at all within 10 yards of where George was sitting, suggesting that George never ought to come into an ordinary-sized boat with feet that length, and advising him to hang them over the side, as he would have done before supper, now said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Old chap, I hope I haven't hurt you." And George said, not at all, that it was his fault, and Harris said no. It was his. It was quite pretty to hear them. We lit our pipes and sat, looking out on the quiet night, and talked. George said, why could not we be always like this, away from the world, with its sin and temptation, leading sober, peaceful lives, and doing good. I said it was the sort of thing I had often longed for myself, and we discussed the possibility of our going away. We fall to some handy, well-fitted desert island, and living there in the woods. Harris said that the danger about desert islands, as far as he had heard, was that they were so damp, but George said no, not if properly drained. And then we got on to drains, and that put George in mind of a very funny thing that happened to his father once. He said his father was traveling with another fellow through Wales, and one night they stopped at a little inn where there were some other fellows, and they joined the other fellows and spent the evening with them. They had a very jolly evening and sat up late, and by the time they came to go to bed, this was when George's father was a very young man, was slightly jolly. Too, George's father and George's father's friend were to sleep in the same room, but in different beds. They took the candle and went up. The candle lurched up against the wall when they got into the room, and went out, and they had to undress and grope into bed in the dark. This they did, but instead of getting into separate beds, as they thought they were doing, they both climbed into the same one without knowing it, one getting in with his head at the top, and the other crawling in from the opposite side of the compass, and lying with his feet on the pillow. There was silence for a moment, and then George's father said, "Joe, what's the matter?" "Tom," replied Joe's voice from the other end of the bed. "Why, there's a man in my bed," said George's father. "Here's his feet on my pillow." "Well, it's an extraordinary thing, Tom," answered the other, "but I'm blessed if there isn't a man in my bed." "Too. What are you going to do?" asked George's father. "Well, I'm going to chuck him out," replied Joe. "So am I," said George's father, valiantly. There was a brief struggle, followed by 2 heavy bumps on the floor, and then a rather doleful voice said, "I say, Tom." "Yes. How have you got on?" "Well, to tell you the truth, my man has chucked me out." So's mine, I say. I don't think much of this inn. Do you? What was the name of that inn? Said Harris. The Pig and Whistle, said George. Why? Oh, no. Then it isn't the same, replied Harris. What do you mean? Queried George. Why, it's so curious, murmured Harris. But precisely that very same thing happened to my father once at a country inn. I've often heard him tell the tale. I thought it might have been the same inn. We turned in at 10 that night, and I thought I should sleep well, being tired, but I did. As a rule, I undress and put my head on the pillow, and then somebody bangs at the door and says it is 8:30, but tonight, everything seemed against me, the novelty of it all, the hardness of the boat, the cramped position. I was lying with my feet under one seat and my head on another, the sound of the lapping water round the boat and the wind among the branches kept me restless and disturbed. I did get to sleep for a few hours, and then some part of the boat, which seemed to have grown up in the night, for it certainly was not there when we started, and it had disappeared by the morning, kept digging into my spine. I slept through it for a while, dreaming that I had swallowed a sovereign, and that they were cutting a hole in my back with a gimlet, so as to try and get it out. I thought it very unkind of them, and I told them I would owe them the money, and they should have it at the end of the month. But they would not hear of that, and said it would be much better if they had it then, because otherwise the interest would accumulate so. I got quite cross with them after a bit, and told them what I thought of them, and then they gave the gimlet such an excruciating wrench that I woke up. The boat seemed stuffy, and my head ached, so I thought I would step out into the cool night air. I slipped on what clothes I could find about, some of my own, and some of George's and Harris's, and crept under the canvas onto the bank. It was a glorious night. The moon had sunk, and left the quiet earth alone with the stars. It seemed as if, in the silence and the hush, while we, her children, slept, they were talking with her, their sister, conversing of mighty mysteries in voices too vast and deep for childish human ears to catch the sound. They or us, these strange stars, so cold, so clear. We are as children whose small feet have strayed into some dim-lit temple of the god they have been taught to worship but know not, and, standing where the echoing dome spans the long vista of the shadowy light, glance up, half hoping, half afraid to see some awful vision hovering there. And yet it seems so full of comfort and of strength. The night, in its great presence, our small sorrows creep away. Ashamed, the day has been so full of fret and care, and our hearts have been so full of evil and of bitter thoughts, and the world has seemed so hard and wrong to us. Then night, like some great loving mother, gently lays her hand upon our fevered head, and turns our little tear-stained faces up to hers, and smiles, and, though she does not speak, we know what she would say, and lay our hot flushed cheek against her bosom, and the pain is gone. Sometimes our pain is very deep and real, and we stand before her very silent, because there is no language for our pain, only a moan. Night's heart is full of pity for us. She cannot ease our aching, she takes our hand in hers. And the little world grows very small and very far away beneath us. And, borne on her dark wings, we pass for a moment into a mightier presence than her own. And in the wondrous light of that great presence, all human life lies like a book before us. And we know that pain and sorrow are but the angels of God. Only those who have worn the crown of suffering can look upon that wondrous light, and they, when they return, may not speak of it, or tell the mystery they know. Once upon a time, through a strange country, there rode some goodly knights, and their path lay by a deep wood, where tangled briars grew very thick and strong, and tore the flesh of them that lost their way therein. And the leaves of the trees that grew in the wood were very dark and thick, so that no ray of light came through the branches to lighten the gloom and sadness. And, as they passed by that dark wood, one knight of those that rode, missing his comrades, wandered far away, and returned to them no more, and they, sorely grieving, rode on without him, mourning him as one dead. Now, when they reached the fair castle towards which they had been journeying, they stayed there many days, and made merry, and one night, as they sat in cheerful ease around the logs that burned in the great hall, and drank a loving measure, there came the comrade they had lost, and greeted them. His clothes were ragged, like a beggar's, and many sad wounds were on his sweet flesh, but upon his face there shone a great radiance of deep joy. And they questioned him, asking him what had befallen him, and he told them how in the dark wood he had lost his way, and had wandered many days and nights, till, torn and bleeding, he had lain him down to die. Then, when he was nigh unto death, lo, through the savage gloom there came to him a stately maiden, and took him by the hand, and led him on through devious paths, unknown to any man, until upon the darkness of the wood there dawned a light such as the light of day was unto, but as a little lamp unto the sun. And, in that wondrous light, our wayworn knight saw as in a dream a vision, and so glorious, so fair the vision seemed, that of his bleeding wounds he thought no more, but stood as one entranced, whose joy is deep as is the sea, whereof no man can tell the depth. And the vision faded, and the knight, kneeling upon the ground, thanked the good saint who into that sad wood had strayed his steps. So he had seen the vision that lay there hid. And the name of the dark forest was Sorrow, but of the vision that the good knight saw therein we may not speak nor tell.